Welcome to a tag that kept coming back from the dead. It was supposed to be buried in the snow outside Bastogne, logged, sealed, forgotten. But every time winter returned, someone found it again. Same tag, same name. Private Thomas E. Ward, a soldier who never existed. December 1944. Ardennes forest. Snow, blinding wind screaming through shattered pines. The 101st Infantry dug in under German artillery fire. Radios cracked with static voices overlapping names lost mid-sentence. And then, amid the chaos, a medic's shovel struck metal. A tag, frozen in the mud. Except the medic had already buried its owner 2 days before. They checked the serial. No record, no enlistment, no casualty list. Only the chain clean, untarnished, as if it had never been underground at all. One man swore it hummed in his hand. Another refused to carry it twice. By nightfall, they all agreed on one thing: it wasn't finished yet. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're watching from, and the exact second you felt that first chill. Because what you're about to hear isn't a ghost story. It's a record that keeps rewriting itself. December 1944. Ardennes forest. The snow was deep, the temperature below freezing. What began as a quiet sector of the Western Front became the setting for Germany's final major offensive of the war, the Battle of the Bulge. Bastogne, a small Belgian crossroads town, was the key. Whoever held it controlled the roads that fed the German advance. The 101st Airborne Division, still exhausted from months of fighting, was ordered to hold Bastogne at all costs. Most of them arrived with little winter clothing, short on ammunition, and almost no medical supplies. They dug foxholes in the frozen ground, using bayonets and steel helmets. It was the cold that did most of the killing, one veteran later wrote. You could hear men's boots crack when they tried to move. By December 19th, the town was surrounded. German panzers had closed every road in and out. Shells rained day and night, hitting churches, homes, and field hospitals. The 101st was cut off: no food, no reinforcements, no air support. The wounded were kept in cellars and barns, anywhere with a roof. Some died still wearing their bandages from Normandy. Inside the besieged perimeter, a field hospital was set up in the basement of the seminary at Hemrule. Medics worked by candlelight, their gloves stiff with frozen blood. The official 326th Medical Company log notes morphine exhausted, plasma low. Continuous shelling casualties arriving faster than they can be evacuated. The division surgeon, Colonel Paul Smith, later wrote that they amputated limbs with knives heated over lanterns because sterilizers had frozen solid. By Christmas Eve, German artillery had destroyed the supply depot on the western edge of Bastogne. Men resorted to melting snow for water. Ammunition ration, 5 rounds per man. A radio message intercepted by the Germans that night summed up the situation: no food, little ammo still holding. It became the 101st's motto. In the chaos, personal identification tags, the small oval plates every soldier carried, became both lifeline and last proof of existence. The U.S. Army required 2 tags, one to stay with the body, one collected for record. In Bastogne, bodies couldn't be buried. The ground was too hard and the bombardments too constant. Medics hung tags on nails, wrote serial numbers on scraps of ration boxes, anything to keep track of the fallen. Private First Class. Charles W. Haynes, a medic with the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment, wrote in his diary, "We carried the tags in our pockets, sometimes 5 or 6 at once, waiting for a break in the shelling to move them to graves registration. Each one felt heavier than it should." His notes, preserved at the National Wabyu Museum, describe how many tags went missing during evacuations, and how after the siege hundreds were found, scattered through the snow, still attached to shredded gear or frozen jackets. On December 22nd, the Germans demanded surrender. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe replied with one word: nuts. The answer became legend. That night, a snowstorm rolled in, grounding all aircraft. Men in foxholes heard only the rumble of tanks moving through the trees. In the early hours of December 23rd, the sky cleared. American C-47s dropped supplies and medical kits marked with red crosses. Many of those supply crates broke open on impact. Inside them, morphine bandages, chocolate cigarettes, and replacement dog tags meant for men already dead. One photograph from the 326th Airborne Medical Company shows a row of small tin boxes labeled "Effects of the Deceased Bastogne, 1944." Each box contained letters, watches, and dog tags collected from the field. Most were never reunited with families until years later. Some were destroyed during the Ardennes thaw of 1945, when burial teams returned to reclaim the ground. The files show dozens of serial numbers marked unidentified. After the battle ended in January 1945, the Army's Graves Registration Service cataloged over 3,000 tags recovered around Bastogne. Many had to be matched by dental records or uniform fragments. A few could not be traced at all, likely replacements or duplicates, carried by comrades hoping to protect the identity of the dead. Today, those records remain stored at the National Archives in Maryland and the Bastogne War Museum. One drawer is labeled Untraceable Identification Tags, 1944, 1945. They are real. No mystery, no ghost stories. Just evidence of chaos, metal proof that in the worst winter of the war, men fought until the end, and the snow kept their names longer than memory ever could. Before we continue, leave a comment where you're watching from, and the exact second you paused when you realized this wasn't a legend at all. Because the tag every soldier carried wasn't a token of superstition. It was the Army's way of making sure that even when the body was gone, the name would still come home. December 1944. The German counteroffensive through the Ardennes had caught the Allied command off guard. Bastogne, a small Belgian crossroads town, became the strategic heart of the battle. Whoever held it controlled 7 vital roads that cut through the forest. The 101st Airborne Division, already worn from months of fighting, was ordered to hold it at all costs. By December 19th, German armor had closed every exit. The town was surrounded. Snow fell day and night, temperatures dropped below 20 degrees, and visibility disappeared in the mist of artillery smoke. Official records from the U.S. Army's after-action reports describe Bastogne as frozen chaos. Soldiers dug foxholes with bayonets because the ground was too hard to break. Ammunition ran low. Rations froze solid in their tins. Field medics of the 326th Medical Company turned church basements and farmhouses into improvised hospitals. Candlelight surgery, makeshift tourniquets, and open fires used to warm morphine ampules. Those details appear repeatedly in the company log dated December 22, 26. Colonel Paul Smith, division surgeon, later testified that sterilizers were useless in sub-zero cold. Scalpels were heated over lanterns before each operation. Within that same documentation lies a section few ever read closely: the records of the Graves Registration Service, GRS. The GRS was responsible for collecting and identifying the dead. Under normal conditions, every soldier carried 2 identification tags, one to remain with the body, one to be removed for record. In Bastogne, the system broke down. Frozen soil made burial impossible. Shelling scattered equipment, personal effects, and sometimes the tags themselves. When medics retrieved casualties, they often carried multiple tags in their pockets, waiting for a pause in the bombardment to log the names properly. Many entries from that week list only fragments, tag unreadable, serial illegible, owner unknown. Private Charles W. Haynes, a medic of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment, recorded in his diary, later archived at the National Wubby-Watu Museum in New Orleans, that the tags weighed more than the men. He and others gathered them from destroyed aid stations, tying them in bundles before sending them back through the lines. Each bundle represented dozens of men whose bodies could not yet be moved. When the siege lifted in January 1945, GRS teams found more than 3,000 tags in and around the Bastogne perimeter. Most could be matched to casualty lists. Some could not. The Army's post-war audit filed in 1947 categorized 237 identification tags as untraceable, serial number mismatch or duplicate issue. Photographs held by the Bastogne War Museum and the U.S. National Archives show small tin boxes labeled Effects of Deceased, Bastogne 1944. Inside were letters, pocket watches, and ID tags collected after the siege. Many were returned to families in the late 1940s. Others remained in storage, part of the enormous repatriation effort that continued until 1951. The bureaucratic precision of the process contrasts sharply with the reality on the ground, men freezing, fighting, and dying in a landscape where even names could be lost beneath snow. By the time General Patton's Third Army broke the encirclement on December 26th, the 101st Airborne had suffered roughly 400 killed and 3,000 wounded. The official casualty lists compiled afterward confirm that hundreds of identification tags were either duplicated or missing due to confusion during emergency evacuations. None of these irregularities suggest anything supernatural, only the immense disarray of a winter battlefield. Today, the surviving Bastogne ID tags are preserved in museum collections and archival drawers marked unidentified. Ardennes, 1944-45. They serve as physical proof of the human scale of the siege, not a mystery to be solved, but a record of men who endured the coldest Christmas of the war. Each tag once hung around a neck that carried it through fear, frost, and fire. And even when paperwork failed, those thin plates of metal succeeded in doing exactly what they were meant to do, carry a name home. When the guns finally went silent in January 1945, the snow over Bastogne was no longer white. It was layered with soot oil and frozen debris, shell fragments, torn equipment, and the uncounted remains of those who had fallen during the siege. The 101st Airborne and supporting units pushed eastward, leaving behind a field of scattered personal effects. The immediate priority was pursuit, not recovery. It would take months before the U.S. Army could return to identify its dead. The task fell to the Graves Registration Service, a branch of the Quartermaster Corps. Officially established in 1941, its mission was simple and brutal: recover, identify, and bury the fallen with respect. In the Ardennes, it was nearly impossible. The thaw of early 1945 exposed what the frozen ground had hidden: hundreds of shallow field graves, collapsed dugouts, and the remnants of temporary burials marked only by helmets or sticks. Teams of the 603rd and 606th Graves Registration Companies were dispatched from Verdun and Liège to begin systematic recovery. Their daily reports describe the work in the dry mechanical language of bureaucracy collection area established west of Bastogne. 47 bodies retrieved, 16 identified by tags, remainder unconfirmed. Every recovered set of remains went through the same process. First, the body tag, a paper label wired to the remains, recorded location, estimated unit, and any visible insignia. Personal effects were placed in a cotton bag: watches, knives, letters, religious medals. Identification tags, if found, were logged separately. 2 tags per soldier had been the rule, but in practice, combat chaos meant many carried duplicates, replacements, or tags of friends who had already been killed, a desperate insurance policy. GRS officers knew this. They cross-referenced each serial number with company rosters, casualty cards, and dental charts held in Paris. A match could take days. Some never came. By May 1945, the war in Europe had ended. Bastogne's fields were blooming again, but the recovery work continued. The Quartermaster General's office established permanent cemeteries across Belgium and Luxembourg: Foy, Henri, Chapelle, Neuville-en-Condroz, each holding thousands of American dead awaiting identification or repatriation. In Bastogne alone, nearly 2,800 temporary graves were exhumed and consolidated at the Henri Chapelle American Cemetery by autumn. Each disinterment was documented in triplicate. 1 copy remained in the field, 1 sent to the European Theater headquarters, and 1 filed in Washington. The American Graves Registration Command, AGRC, created in 1946, inherited the massive logistical effort. Its files, now declassified and stored at the U.S. National Archives, show a constant stream of correspondence between field officers and families back home. Parents wrote letters asking when they could reclaim their sons' remains. Some requested that the bodies stay in Europe. Others pleaded for return. The Army allowed next of kin to choose. Between 1947 and 1951, Operation TAP's transport of American personnel to the States repatriated over 170,000 bodies from Europe to the U.S. The numbers from the Ardennes were staggering. According to the Quartermaster Corps' 1949 report, approximately 81,000 American soldiers were killed during the Battle of the Bulge. Of these, more than 10,000 were initially listed as missing in action. The recovery teams in Belgium and Luxembourg ultimately accounted for nearly all, but not all. Even by 1952, several hundred remained unidentified, buried under headstones marked "Jean here rests in honored glory," a comrade in arms, known but to God. Identification tags were the key to the process, but they were not infallible. Many were damaged, burned, or separated from bodies during explosions. Others were found in clusters, entire chains of mixed tags, recovered from medical clearing stations that had been shelled. The AGRC learned to distrust single sources. Instead, they built composite profiles, uniform remnants, dental records, bone measurements, even handwriting from recovered letters. One field officer in 1947 described the work as assembling a life from fragments of silence. The meticulous nature of the operation is visible in the surviving paperwork. Each recovered tag was assigned a graves registration number and cataloged into ledgers now housed in the Quartermaster Museum in Fort Gregg Adams, Virginia. Pages list serials, ranks, blood types, discovery coordinates, and remarks such as partial remains only or duplicate tag issued prior to KIA. Many of these notations explain the anomalies later found in archives, serial mismatches, unknown owners, or tags without remains. They weren't mysteries. They were clerical artifacts of a system under unimaginable pressure. Civilian participation in post-war recovery was also significant. Belgian farmers and foresters returning to ruined land regularly unearthed helmets, rifles, and tags while clearing fields. They reported finds to local gendarmerie posts, which in turn contacted American liaison officers. The pattern continued for decades. By the 1960s, local historical societies had gathered hundreds of artifacts from the Ardennes region. Many of them are now displayed at the Bastogne War Museum and the Martisson Memorial, tangible threads connecting the living to the winter of 1944. One particularly well-documented case involved the recovery of personal effects belonging to Lieutenant Eric Fisher Wood Jr., an artillery officer killed near Champs, Belgium. His remains were not located until months later, identified by his identification tags and fragments of uniform. The report filed February 1946 illustrates how even partial evidence could restore a name. For every famous case, there were thousands of quiet ones, ordinary men whose dog tags were logged, boxed, and shipped to family homes across America. The tags became both proof and memorial, the only link between battlefield and front porch. In modern Bastogne, the legacy of that process still shapes the landscape. Each December, commemorations mark the siege's anniversary. Veterans' families and local residents gather under the same wintry sky where artillery once thundered. Wreaths are laid at the Martisson Monument, a five-pointed star inscribed with the names of all 50 U.S. states. Some attendees bring objects found on their land shell fragments, insignia rusted tags. They hand them over to museum staff who catalog each item and, when possible, trace it back through the AGRC database. Most of these artifacts are now exhibited with meticulous provenance labeled not with mystery, but with certainty, aim rank unit, and fate. The modern U.S. Defense POW, MIA Accounting Agency, DPAA, still works to identify the remaining unaccounted-for soldiers from World War II. As of 2024, roughly 72,000 Americans from the war remain missing. About 26,000 are considered potentially recoverable. The Ardennes continues to yield evidence, fragments of bone remnants of equipment tags, corroded but legible. Every new discovery triggers the same ritual: documentation, DNA comparison, confirmation, and finally notification to next of kin. The process has outlived the soldiers who began it. There is no myth in that. Only the persistence of record and remembrance. The dog tag that comes back is not a ghost story. It's a metaphor for the system itself, one that never stopped working, never stopped returning names to where they belong. In Bastogne, in Henri-Chapelle, and across the quiet fields of the Ardennes, history still rises from the soil every spring, not to haunt, but to complete its unfinished paperwork. So when visitors walk the memorial paths today and find a small piece of stamped metal in the dirt, they aren't uncovering superstition. They are meeting the evidence of order carved out of war's chaos. Each recovered tag, whether bent, burned, or broken, still performs its duty, linking a fragment of earth to a human name. It is the most honest miracle war ever produced, the persistence of identity in a landscape built to erase it. The story of Bastogne does not end where the records stop. The files of the Graves Registration Service close neatly in Washington, but the same handwriting, the same clerks, the same typewriters reappear across Europe in the months that followed. The process that began in the snow of the Ardennes continued in the forests of Hurtgen, in the meadows of Foy, in the ruins of Aachen. Everywhere the front had passed, the earth began to give back what it had taken. In February 1945, recovery units moved east from Bastogne into the Hurtgen forest, a place so dense and mined that even the trees had been torn to splinters. There, the 30th, 40th, and 607th Graves registration companies faced a task worse than Bastogne's tangled remains of infantry units lost during the autumn battles. Reports from those units list entire squads found months later, identified only by fragments of uniforms, service numbers on gear, or occasionally a tag wedged beneath bone. One memo reads simply, "Location Hurtgen, 6 kilometers southwest of Vosenac. Remains 11." Tags recovered. The others had been lost to the forest. That same winter, another pattern emerged. As sectors were cleared and the ground thawed, Belgian and Luxembourgish civilians began delivering personal effects to American command posts, small packages wrapped in cloth, labeled with handwritten notes, "Found in my field near burned tank. Please return." The Quartermaster Corps logged these items as civilian submissions, and a few dozen survive in the archives today. Some were easily matched to missing soldiers. Others entered the growing category of unidentified. They now rest in boxes labeled "Effects Turned Over by Local Population, 1945-46, across the Channel. In the United States, that bridge between the living and the lost took another form. Families received letters from the Army Effects Bureau, formal notifications containing line after line of classification code. Personal effects received parcel number 17. Inside were the contents of a life, a wallet, a ring, a tag, a letter half burned. Many families described the moment they opened those parcels as the second death, the bureaucratic confirmation of loss. Yet others said it was the first time the war became real. That quiet exchange, a piece of metal leaving Europe and arriving on a kitchen table in Ohio or Texas, was the unseen continuation of Bastogne. The bridge extended even further into the Cold War era. In 1948, the newly formed American Battle Monuments Commission assumed responsibility for permanent cemeteries overseas. Bastogne's temporary graves were consolidated into Henri Chapelle and Luxembourg American cemeteries, their white crosses aligned under Belgian skies. The Commission's records show the same pattern that began in the Ardennes. Some graves identified by tag, others by dental chart, some by nothing at all. But even the unknowns were recorded. The logic was clear: no American should remain uncounted, even if unnamed. In 1951, the last major repatriation ship, the USAT Sergeant Archer T. Gammon, left Antwerp carrying 600 coffins bound for the United States. Among them were men from Bastogne, Hurtgen, and Foy. Reporters at the docks described the sound of chains and wooden crates as a slow heartbeat leaving Europe. The bridge between continents was complete, but the work never truly ended. Half a century later, in the 1990s, that same bridge reappeared in a new form: research. Belgian historians and American archivists began reopening GRS files, cross-matching serial numbers with declassified personnel rosters. Some of the unidentified from Bastogne were finally named through dental and anthropological comparison. In 2018, the U.S. Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency confirmed the identification of several soldiers recovered near Foy 74 years after the battle. Their families received letters similar to those sent in 1945, same phrasing, same tone, same promise kept. This continuity from a snowfield in 1944 to a DNA lab in 2018 is what links Bastogne to every other field of war. The same chain of paperwork, discipline, and compassion stretches across generations. The records do not close, they echo. Every recovered tag, every matched serial number, every cross returned to a family is a small act of resistance against erasure. The bridge is not made of wood or stone. It is made of record cards, identification tags, and the insistence that even after decades, a name still matters. That is why the motif persists. The tag that comes back is not myth, it is process repeated and perfected until it becomes ritual. From Bastogne to Hurtgen, from Ardennes soil to American earth. The same logic holds: nothing is truly lost if it is still being searched for. Today, at the Henri Chapelle Cemetery, visitors often find small replicas of tags left at the base of the memorial walls, names pressed into metal, shining in the rain. They are not relics of superstition, but of continuity. Each one is a link in the same chain that began in 1944, carried by men who refused to let each other vanish. The bridge is complete. It connects the paperwork to the silence, the archives to the ground, the unknown to the known. And as long as someone keeps tracing those numbers, reading those names aloud, the record of Bastogne and every place like it remains unfinished by design. Because remembrance, like identification, is a task that never truly ends. The recovery teams that swept through the Ardennes in early 1945 carried no illusions. They worked quietly, methodically, in a land still marked by frozen trenches and half-collapsed barns. Each time they found a set of remains, the first thing they looked for was the small oval of stamped metal, a dog tag. That thin plate was the bridge between anonymity and identity. Without it, a soldier remained unknown. With it, a life could be restored to record. One of those records, filed on February 6, 1946, bears the name First Lieutenant Eric Fisher Wood, Jr. He had served with the 589th Field Artillery Battalion, 106th Infantry Division, a Princeton graduate, and the son of a U.S. general. He went missing near the village of Champs, just west of Bastogne, in the opening days of the German offensive. When his unit was overrun in December 1944, Wood was last seen rallying a handful of stragglers in the forest. For months, nothing more was known. The Army listed him as missing in action. His family received the standard telegram, "The department regrets to inform you." In January 1945, his father, Brigadier General Eric Fisher Wood Sr., personally wrote to the War Department asking for information. The answer came months later, not through command channels, but from a Belgian farmer. When American recovery teams reached the area around Champs after the snow melted, villagers led them to a shallow depression beneath a pine tree. There lay the skeletal remains of a man in a tattered American uniform, his weapon still beside him. Nearby, they found 7 German soldiers buried in a rough line. The local story, later confirmed by forensic evidence, said that one American officer had continued to fight alone in the woods, ambushing enemy patrols for days after his unit had been destroyed. When he was finally killed, the Germans buried him themselves, a mark of respect. The identification was immediate. On his chest lay a U.S. Army dog tag, clean, uncorroded stamped Wood, Eric F. Jr. 71933, T43, 44A, Protestant, O. The serial number matched the missing officer from the 589th Field Artillery. There was no doubt. That small tag, still attached by its chain, ended 6 months of uncertainty. His father received word on March 1, 1946, remains positively identified through dental comparison and service tag. Lieutenant Wood's body was reinterred at the Henri Chapelle American Cemetery grave, A443. Later, at his family's request, his remains were returned to Pennsylvania, where he was buried in Arlington Cemetery. The tag was presented to his family, preserved in a velvet-lined box by the War Department's Effects Bureau. It remains in their possession to this day. The story was verified again decades later when Belgian historians compared wartime testimonies with the official quartermaster files. Everything matched the position of the remains, the ballistic evidence, and the original identification tag number logged in the 1946 report. There was nothing mysterious about it, no legend, no rumor, just a soldier's tag performing exactly the purpose it was designed for, to carry his name through fire, frost, and time. And yet, the emotional echo of that small object was immense. In every American division, the same kind of discovery repeated itself. One tag in Bastogne, one in Foy, another near Noville. Each recovery report told the same silent story. Tag found on remains, serial confirmed, identification complete. For families back home, those sentences were everything. The metal proof that a missing son had finally been found, that he had not vanished into Europe's mud. The dog tag was never meant to be sentimental. It was invented for efficiency, for order in chaos. But in Bastogne, it became something sacred. Each tag that surfaced after the battle represented the moment when the paperwork met the human truth. The quartermaster files are filled with quiet miracles like Wood's, not because the dead returned, but because the living refused to let them disappear. By the late 1940s, over 99% of the U.S. dead in the European theater had been identified, nearly all through tags and dental records. The final report of the American Graves Registration Command credits personal identification tags as the single most effective recovery tool in the history of modern warfare. It was simple 2 pieces of metal stamped before deployment, ensuring that no man would remain nameless. Today, visitors to the Bastogne War Museum can see recovered tags in display cases, thin rusted, some bent or cracked, yet still readable. One of them, retrieved from the area near Champs, bears the name E.F. Wood, Jr., a replica placed to mark where the original once lay. The museum's placard reads, "Identification tag recovered 1945 Bastogne sector. Proof of service, sacrifice, and remembrance." The tag that came home to his family and the tag that remains in Bastogne together tell the same truth, that memory can be made of metal, and that war's coldest artifact can still be the warmest proof of life. History likes to close its files, but Bastogne never really closes. The snow still falls there each winter, soft, indifferent, unknowing. Beneath it lie the traces of men who carried metal tags not for glory, but for identification. A system of remembrance forged before the first shot was ever fired. The records say that Lieutenant Eric Fisher Wood Jr. was found. They list his coordinates, his serial number, and the words, identification complete. The document ends neatly, black ink, government stamp case closed. But the meaning of that tag did not end there. It passed from a frozen field in Belgium to a desk in Washington, from an archive box to a family hand. 70 years later, it still connects the living and the dead with a piece of steel the size of a matchbox. That is the quiet truth behind all the numbers the war didn't stop when the shooting did. It stopped only when each name was spoken again, when a small oval of metal said I was here. I had a name. Every recovered tag was both a conclusion and a beginning proof that even when the body vanished, the record refused to. The soldier I never met never really disappeared. He simply waited for someone to find his name and carry it forward. Maybe that's what the tag was meant to do all along, choose its keeper, not by blood or fate, but by remembrance. And in that sense, every time we read a name etched into steel, we keep that promise alive. Maybe they didn't come back. Maybe we did to finish what memory began. You've just heard another file from Classified History. If you'd like to learn more, subscribe for the next story waiting to be uncovered.